We live in an age of total visibility. We install these devices to feel safe, convinced that by observing the darkness we can keep it at bay. But for those whose job it is to stare into monitors, surveillance isn't a shield, it's a window into the impossible. We trust these cold witnesses to tell the truth. We trust these digital eyes to guard our sleep and protect our families. Yet we rarely consider what they might see when we aren't looking back. Elias knows this weight better than anyone. He is a veteran security monitor, a long-time professional who has spent 20 years in this vocation. He has watched thousands of hours of grainy, silent footage across his career. He has seen the mundane tragedies of life, the petty thefts and the silent loneliness of the night shift. He thought he had seen everything the world had to offer until tonight. Tonight, the pixels are behaving differently, forming shapes that should not exist in any rational reality. The first recording comes from a high-definition baby monitor in a quiet suburb. The nursery is bathed in the soft green glow of night vision. In the center, a wooden crib holds a sleeping infant. But as the clock ticks past midnight, a mass of absolute blackness coalesces in the corner of the room. The shadow leans over the crib, its formless head inches from the child's face. When the mother enters the room, she adjusts the blanket and leaves. To her, the room is empty. To the camera, the shadow never moves, its gaze fixed on the infant. The second clip is a doorbell camera at a modern home. At exactly 3:00 a.m., a figure appears. It doesn't approach the door, it simply manifests in the center of the porch. The figure stands perfectly still for 2 agonizing hours, draped in rags that seem to absorb the porch light. In its hand, it holds a heavy, rusted iron key. It doesn't knock or move. It just waits, holding that key like an invitation to a lock that hasn't been built yet, staring into the lens with a void where its face should be. Then, there is the industrial footage from a sprawling warehouse. A lone night shift worker is checking inventory when heavy wooden pallets stacked 5 feet high are tossed aside like paper by an invisible force. There is no wind, no machinery in motion. This unseen poltergeist systematically clears a path through the aisles, cornering the terrified worker against a concrete wall. The footage ends with the man looking up into empty space, his face contorted in a scream as the feed begins to hiss with digital static. In a closed COVID ward of a metropolitan hospital, thermal imaging cameras captured something the staff missed. A heat signature, bright orange against the cool blue of the hallway, walks with a steady gait. It passes directly through a solid wall leading into a room where a patient had passed away only an hour prior. The signature isn't a ghost of light. The sensors detect a temperature of nearly 100 degrees, moving through the architecture of the building, as if the walls were made of mist. Finally, the motion-activated cameras at a public park flicker to life in the dead of night. There is no breeze, yet a single swing begins to move in a rhythmic arc. The swing reaches its peak, the metal groaning under an invisible weight. Higher and higher it goes, the chains creaking in a sound the microphone struggles to process. For a single frame, the faint, translucent outline of a small child appears sitting on the swing, head tilted back in a laugh, before vanishing into the darkness. As Elias cycles through these clips, a cold knot forms in his stomach. He begins to notice a recurring detail. A small, etched symbol resembling a broken eye. It is scratched into the nursery wallpaper, carved into the warehouse floor, and painted on the hospital glass. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias leans closer to the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The symbol is here too. He looks at the live feed of his own station's entrance. There, standing on the other side of the heavy security door, is the figure from the porch. It is holding the rusted key, staring directly into the camera lens with unnatural focus. Elias remained frozen, his gaze locked onto the monitor that displayed the figure outside his own door. The air in the booth felt suddenly very thin, as if the oxygen were being siphoned out by the presence on the screen. He began to understand a terrifying urban legend, the Watcher's Curse. It was the terrifying idea that surveillance isn't a one-way street. By observing these anomalies, the observer inadvertently creates a metaphysical tether, a bridge between our world and whatever plane these horrors inhabit. To watch is to witness, and to witness is to be marked. The more Elias scrutinized the pixels, the more he realized he had invited them in. He forced himself to look away, clicking to the next file to avoid the gaze of the entity outside. Clip 6 showed a domestic scene, a woman in a bathroom brushing her hair. The camera was a simple security lens, yet it captured something impossible. As the woman leaned in to check her complexion, her reflection stopped moving. While the real woman continued to pull the brush through her hair, the mirror image froze, its face contorting into a cold, predatory stare directed not at her physical counterpart, but directly into the lens. It stood there, unblinking, watching through the glass until the lights were extinguished. The next recording shifted to the eerie green of a suburban basement. A family slept soundly upstairs, unaware of the movement below. Out of a narrow crawl space, a pale, long-limbed entity began to emerge. It didn't have bones in the traditional sense. It unfolded like a spider, its limbs too long for its spindly torso. It crept across the concrete floor with a sickening, silent grace, sniffing the air. It spent hours sitting at the bottom of the basement stairs, staring up toward the bedrooms, waiting for a door to be left ajar, before retreating back into the damp, dark earth below the foundations. The screen flickered to a desolate gas station at 4 in the morning. A man in a blue jacket entered the store to buy coffee. The feed showed him clearly. However, seconds later, the exact same man walked through the front door again. Elias scrubbed the footage back and forth. The first man had vanished from the feed entirely the moment the second one entered, despite there being no other exit. It was a perfect mimic, a glitch, leaving the second man standing at the counter with a vacant expression. In the 9th clip, high-angle footage from an abandoned asylum showed a group of urban explorers. The camera should have been dead for decades, as there was no power to the building, yet it recorded with crystalline clarity. The explorers were being subtly herded. Every time they tried to turn back, a shadow or a sudden noise pushed them deeper into the labyrinthine halls. The camera watched them from above, a silent shepherd leading its flock toward the darkness of the basement. They weren't being hunted, they were being systematically collected. The 10th clip was a time-lapse of a kitchen. Over 8 hours, a ceiling vent was pushed aside, and a gaunt, ragged man lowered himself down. He ate scraps from a plate and stood over the sleeping residents on the couch for hours, his sunken face just inches from theirs. He was a human parasite living in the architecture. The psychological toll was immense. They lived in fear, knowing their homes were never safe. They realized their private sanctuaries were compromised, haunted by the knowledge that the walls have eyes. Suddenly, the desk phone rang. It was a colleague, his voice frantic. He said he had traced the metadata of the kitchen clip. "Elias, look at the wallpaper," the voice whispered. Elias felt his heart stop. He recognized it. It was his childhood home. And as the intruder on the screen looked up, Elias saw the face. It was his father, who had gone missing 20 years ago, looking exactly as he did the day he disappeared. Elias dropped the phone, the plastic clattering against the metal desk as the image of his father's face burned into his retinas. The man on the screen had not aged since 2004, a biological impossibility that defied every law of nature, Elias understood. This realization that his own history was intertwined with these digital nightmares shattered his remaining resolve completely. The boundary between the screen and the observer was rapidly dissolving. The pixels began to bleed like dark ink in water, and the static hum of the monitors grew into a rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in his very marrow. He turned his eyes to the 11th monitor, a feed from a hidden trail camera deep in the Blackwood forest. A shapeless void, darker than the midnight trees, moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. It didn't walk. It consumed the physical space in front of it, pulling the moonlight into a gravitational well of absolute nothingness. As it accelerated toward the lens, the light around it warped, turning the forest into a distorted tunnel of grey and black. It didn't reach the camera. It simply blinked, and the feed died into a flat, silent grey. On the 12th screen, a GoPro left in a Victorian attic hummed with heavy interference. The dusty air was thick with decay. A voice broke through the white noise, a wet, intimate whisper that spoke the full name of the researcher who had placed the device there. The camera shook violently, as if grabbed by invisible, freezing fingers, and the lens cracked from the inside out, as if the sheer atmospheric pressure of the spirit's presence was too great for the glass to contain. Inside a stainless steel elevator, a businessman stood alone, checking his watch with a tired sigh. But the reflection in the polished metal walls told a different story. In the mirror-like surface, he was surrounded by dozens of pale, spindly hands emerging from the corners of the ceiling, reaching down to brush his hair. The real man felt nothing, looking up at the floor indicator while his reflection screamed in silent agony as the hands began to pull him into the cold steel of the wall. A quiet street showed a lone pedestrian hurrying past a clothing storefront. As the man walked by, a mannequin in the shattered window slowly turned its head. It wasn't a mechanical jerk. It was a smooth human motion. The camera captured the mannequin's eyes following him until he disappeared around the corner. Once he was gone, the figure turned back to look directly at the security camera, a painted smile stretching wider than the plastic should have ever allowed. The final recording was a first-person point of view, showing a lens being systematically dismantled by translucent fingers. The internal components were pulled out like digital organs, and as the light sensor was crushed, a digital scream erupted from the speakers, a sound so violent it caused the monitors in Elias's dusty booth to flicker and sparks to fly from the control panel like dying stars. The screen displaying his own doorway went black, leaving only his terrified reflection in the dark glass. Elias heard the heavy, metallic clink of the rusted key sliding into the deadbolt of his station. He realized the watcher's curse was real. It was a meticulously designed trap. By watching, he had unwittingly provided the energy and the formal invitation for these entities to cross the threshold and enter his physical reality. The figure outside was no longer just a recording. It was a horrifying physical inevitability. One by one, the monitors died, plunging the station into a suffocating darkness. The final image captured by Elias's own internal camera showed his empty chair spinning slowly in the silence. A tall, distorted shadow moved toward the lens, blocking the last of the light. Tonight, as you prepare for bed, check your own security feeds. You never know who else is watching you from the other side of the glass.